She was 6 years old, barefoot on a frozen road, and she was not crying. That was the part that broke them. A little girl walking alone through a Kentucky November night. No shoes, no coat, just a damaged backpack clutched to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her alive. And maybe it was. The gravel cut her feet. The wind moved through her thin dress like it had a grudge. But she did not cry. She had been taught not to, taught that crying slowed you down, taught that slow got you caught. She had one instruction. 1. Find the men with the loud motorcycles. They won't let you die. And so she walked. 3 miles. In the dark. Alone. If you want to know what happens when a 6-year-old carrying a secret powerful enough to destroy an empire knocks on the door of 14 dangerous men, then stay until the end. And if this story hits something deep in your chest, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Every single one of you matters. Now let's go. The road did not have the name on any map that mattered. It ran between 2 fields of dead winter corn, cutting through the dark like a scar. And at 11:47 on a Tuesday in November, the only living thing on it was a child. She moved without rushing, which was its own kind of terrible. Not the panicked sprint of a lost kid, not the stumbling wander of someone confused. She moved with intention, with direction, with the flat measured steps of someone who had been preparing for this walk for longer than anyone should ever have to prepare. Her name was Maisie Rowan. She was 6 years and 3 months old. She weighed 41 pounds. The gravel underneath her bare feet was the kind of cold that stopped being pain after a while and became something closer to numbness. And she understood, in the wordless, bone-level way that children understand things, that numbness was better than pain right now. Pain slowed you down. Her mother had told her that. Her mother had told her a lot of things over the past 3 weeks. The backpack was the most important thing. Not the cold, not the darkness, not the blood on the bottom of her right foot where a sharp stone had opened a thin cut 2 miles back. The backpack. Dark green canvas, 1 broken zipper, a faded patch of a cartoon fox stitched above the front pocket. Inside the backpack were things that Maisie did not fully understand but understood mattered. Her mother had explained it in the careful, quiet way she explained things when she was trying not to scare her. These are papers, baby. These are recordings. This is a book of names and numbers. People are going to want this very badly. You cannot let them have it. You understand me? Maisie had understood. The men at the garage. The motorcycle men. You walk straight there. You don't stop. You don't talk to anyone else. Not the police, not a stranger. Not anyone who offers you a ride. You walk to the motorcycle men and you give them the backpack and you tell them your name. She could see the light now. Faint orange, pulsing slightly like something breathing. A neon crow above a building at the end of a gravel lot, surrounded by pickup trucks and covered motorcycles, and the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full of things waiting. She could smell oil and exhaust even from here. The smell of engines, of machines that went fast and loud and didn't apologize for either. She walked toward the light. Inside the Black Crow's garage, the night had settled into its usual shape. The overhead fluorescence hummed over 3 half-dismantled Harley Softails and 1 vintage panhead that belonged to nobody officially, but which everyone understood was Ridge Callahan's, the way most important things at the garage belonged to Ridge, without anyone ever needing to say it aloud. The space was large and cold and smelled like every garage that had ever been used seriously. Oil and metal and old coffee and cigarette smoke layered into the concrete floor over the course of 15 years until the floor itself seemed to exhale it. 14 men occupied the space in various states of work and rest. Hatch was under the Softail nearest the side door, visible only as a pair of boots and the occasional cursing. Briggs and 2 others played cards at the workbench turned table in the corner. Dex Morales sat with his back against the wall near the parts shelf, cleaning a carburetor he'd cleaned twice already that week, his hands moving on it by habit rather than need, the way some men's hands needed to be doing something or the rest of them wouldn't sit still. And Ridge was at his workbench, alone, working on nothing. He was 51 years old and looked it in the ways that mattered. The deep lines around his eyes, the gray that had taken over his hair completely in the last 3 years. The way he moved with the particular deliberateness of a man whose body had accumulated consequences. He had been out of Eddyville Correctional for 4 years and 9 months. He did not count the days anymore. He used to. Now he just counted other things. How many of his brothers were still standing? How many bills the garage had paid versus how many it owed? How many of the 14 men under this roof had somewhere else to go if this roof ever stopped being available? The answer to that last one was 3. 3 men had families of their own, lives that extended past these walls. The other 11 lived here in varying degrees of officially. Ridge did not ask too many questions about that. He understood what it meant to need a place that would not ask too many questions. He was staring at the panhead when the side door opened. Nobody knocked at the Black Crow's garage. You came in or you didn't. So when the side door swung inward and let in a hard ribbon of November air and a small figure stepped through it, there was a half-second of confused readjustment in the room. The card stopped moving. Dex's hands went still on the carburetor, Hatch's cursing from underneath the softail cut off mid-syllable. Because what the room was expecting and what the room received were 2 entirely different things. She stood in the doorway, barefoot in a thin dress, cheeks and nose raw with cold, dark hair loose and tangled, one small hand holding the strap of a green backpack, the other hand hanging at her side, slightly curled, the posture of someone who had been told to keep their hands where people could see them. She looked around the room. 14 men looked back at her. She did not flinch. "My name is Maisie," she said. Her voice was completely steady. "My mom told me to find you." Nobody moved for 3 seconds. Then Ridge was moving, and when Ridge moved in a direction, people got out of the way without discussing it. He crossed the garage floor in 8 steps, and he dropped to one knee in front of her because he was a large man, and he understood that being large could be its own kind of threat, and he did not want to be a threat to this child. Up close, she was smaller than he'd understood from across the room, and colder. He could feel the cold coming off her skin from a foot away. "You walk here?" he asked. She nodded. "From where?" "Mama's car. It stopped on Mill Creek Road. We ran out of gas." A pause. "That was a long time ago." Ridge reached out slowly and touched the back of her hand. Her skin was like cold stone. He pulled his hand back and looked over his shoulder. "Dex. Blanket from the back room. Now." He looked back at the girl. "Your feet, sweetheart. Let me see your feet." She lifted one foot without argument. The bottom was dirty and dark, and when he tilted it toward the light from the fluorescence, he could see the cut on the right one, dried dark at the edges, still faintly wet in the center. "Hatch," he said, still not raising his voice. "First aid kit." Hatch was already on his feet and moving. That was the thing about this group of men. They could be difficult, complicated, argumentative on any other subject in the world, but when Ridge's voice got that particular flatness, they moved. Maisie watched all of this with serious dark eyes. She did not look frightened of the men. She looked like she had been briefed, like she had been told, "This is what they will look like. This is how they will act. Do not be afraid." And she wasn't, which said more about what she'd come from than anything else could have. Dex appeared with a blanket, the old green wool one from the back room, faded but heavy, and Ridge wrapped it around her shoulders himself, and then lifted her, carefully, the way you lifted something fragile. She was so light it was alarming. He carried her to the workbench stool, the one he usually sat on himself, and set her down on it and stepped back to give her space. "Your mama sent you to us?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "She tell you why?" Maisie looked at him for a moment, assessing something. Then she reached into the green backpack and withdrew a small notebook, spiral-bound, ordinary, the kind sold in packs at any dollar store, and held it out to him. "She said you'd know what to do with it," Maisie said. "She said you were the only ones." Ridge took the notebook. He didn't open it yet. He looked at the girl instead. "What's your mama's name?" "Caroline Rowan?" Something moved across Dex's face. Ridge caught it peripherally. He filed it away. "And where's your mama now, Maisie?" "She's hiding." The girl said it without drama, as a fact. "She said if I came here, they'd look for me instead of her. She said that buys time." The garage had gone very quiet. Not the quiet of men ignoring something. The opposite. The kind of quiet that happens when 14 people are all paying complete attention to the same small, terrible thing. "Who's looking for you?" Ridge asked. Maisie looked at him, and for the first time, something shifted in those serious dark eyes. Not fear exactly, more like the weight of something she had been carrying alone and was now considering putting down. "My dad," she said. Ridge opened the notebook. The first page was covered in Caroline Rowan's handwriting. Small, precise, the handwriting of someone who had learned to be neat about things, who had trained herself to take up less space. At the top of the page, underlined twice, "If you're reading this, she found you. Please help her. Please help us both. CR." Below that, a list of dates, names, numbers, account information, amounts with too many digits. Ridge flipped pages slowly. The notebook was 60 pages long, and it was almost entirely full, dates going back 2 years. Transactions. Initials. Locations Ridge recognized. County roads, warehouse addresses, names of businesses he'd seen on signs driving through Harlan County. Businesses owned, as far as he knew, by one man. A man whose name was in this town the way weather was in this town, present whether you wanted it or not. A man who owned 2 car dealerships and a construction company and sat on the county development board and had the particular easy confidence of someone who had never in their life been told no in a way that stuck. Victor Rowan. Maisie's father. Ridge closed the notebook. He looked at Maisie. She was watching him with that same steadiness. The blanket was around her shoulders, and Hatch had cleaned and wrapped the cut on her foot, and she sat on the workbench stool like it was a throne she had been escorted to. She had drunk half a mug of warm water because they didn't have juice, and she had not complained about that. "You know what's in here?" Ridge asked, holding up the notebook. "Some of it," she said. "Mama explained the parts she thought I should know." "And what did she tell you?" "She said my dad hurts people," Maisie said. "She said he pays people to make it so no one can stop him. She said she's been collecting proof for a long time, and now she has enough, and now he knows she has it, and that's why we had to run." She paused. "She said the police won't help because some of them are in the book." Ridge sat with that for a moment. Outside, the November wind hit the garage door, and the whole building shuddered faintly. The neon crow above the entrance flickered once. "Your mama," Ridge said carefully. "Did she tell you anything else about us? About why she sent you here?" Maisie thought about it, her small brow furrowed. "She said you've all made mistakes," she said. "She said you know what it feels like when no one believes you and the people who are supposed to protect you don't." A pause. "She said that means you'd understand." The garage was so quiet that the hum of the fluorescent lights was suddenly audible. Dex had set the carburetor down. Briggs had pushed the playing cards away from himself without seeming to notice he'd done it. Hatch was standing near the first aid kit with his arms folded and an expression on his face like he'd swallowed something that hadn't agreed with him. Ridge looked at the notebook in his hands. He looked at the child on the stool. He thought about Eddyville Correctional, about the particular quality of silence in a cell at 3 in the morning when there was nothing left to think about except everything you'd done wrong, about standing in a courtroom and understanding fully that the machinery of justice was a machine like any other. It could be operated by people who meant well, or people who didn't, and the outcome had less to do with truth than with who was standing at the controls. He thought about Victor Rowan's name on the County Development Board placard he'd passed 12 days ago on the highway heading into town, the sign with the county seal and the list of members and the man's name right there in official letters, solid as stone, immovable. He thought about a woman spending 2 years gathering evidence, choosing these men specifically, sending her daughter 3 miles alone through a November night because she'd calculated somehow that this was the safest option available to her. What did it say about a woman's situation when the safest option was a garage full of ex-convicts? He already knew the answer. He'd been living inside that answer his whole adult life. "All right," Ridge said. Just that word. Just the one. But in the garage, 14 men understood what it meant. It meant the night had changed. It meant the thing they'd been resting in the middle of was over now. It meant a choice had been made. Dex looked at him across the space between them, and Ridge saw something complicated moving in the man's expression, something that might have been relief and might have been dread and might have been both at once. And then Dex looked away. Ridge made note of that too. "You hungry?" he asked Maisie. She considered it seriously, the way she considered everything. Yes, she said, but I should tell you something first. Ridge waited. My mom had her phone, Maisie said. She called me from it before mine died. She said to tell you they're probably already tracking where she went. The girl paused. She said they might already know where I am. She said it without panic. The way you said something you'd been rehearsing, the way you said something you'd been told to say, even when it scared you. And Ridge Callahan, who had spent the better part of 3 decades believing the universe had used up whatever goodwill it might have once felt toward him, felt something cold move through his chest that had nothing to do with November. He stood up. Dex, he said, kill the lights facing the road, all of them. And when Dex moved toward the switches, Ridge turned to the garage window and looked out through the grime and the condensation toward the gravel road beyond the lot. There was a vehicle parked at the far edge of the road. No headlights, just a dark shape, sitting still. And even from here, even through the dirty glass, Ridge could see that it was facing the garage. It had been there long enough that he wasn't sure anymore whether it had arrived just now or whether it had been there since before she walked through the door, which meant there was a chance, a real and terrible chance, that whoever was in that vehicle had watched a barefoot 6-year-old walk 3 miles down a frozen road and had let her walk, had followed her right to them. Ridge did not move away from the window. He stood with his back to the room and his eyes on the dark shape at the edge of the road, and for a long moment the only sound in the garage was the hum of the fluorescents and the wind working itself against the corrugated steel roof and the quiet, shallow breathing of a 6-year-old girl on a workbench stool. Then he heard Dex cross the floor behind him and stop at his shoulder, and he could feel the man looking at the same thing he was looking at. How long you think it's been there? Dex said low. Don't know. Could be nothing. Could be someone parked to make a call. No lights, Ridge said. Phone screen would have shown. Dex said nothing for a moment. Then, she said they followed her. She said they might have. That's close enough. Ridge turned away from the window. The room had rearranged itself. The card game was completely abandoned. Briggs was on his feet. The 2 men who'd been with him similarly upright, all of them with that particular stillness that was not relaxation but its opposite. Hatch was near the side door. Cutter, the youngest of them at 33, was standing near the parts shelf with his phone in his hand and an expression that said he was waiting for permission to do something with it. Tommy Lee, who was 54 and had bad knees from a decade of roofing work before all of this, was standing near Maisie's stool with his arms crossed, not hovering, just present, the way a large, scarred man could be a wall between a child and a door without making it obvious that was what he was doing. Ridge looked at all of them. Lights, he said to Dex. Dex moved to the panel near the back and killed the 3 floods that faced the road. The garage went dimmer, just the work lights over the benches now, and the residual glow from the back room. And the window became less a window and more a mirror, reflecting the inside of the garage back at them, which meant whatever was outside could no longer see in clearly. Small advantage. But Ridge had learned to appreciate small advantages. Cutter, he said, put the phone away. I was going to check that. I know what you were going to do. Put it away. Cutter put it in his pocket. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He was young enough to still feel the friction of being told no, and old enough to know that friction wasn't always wrong. Ridge pulled his own phone out, looked at it for 2 seconds, and put it face down on the workbench. Then he went to Maisie. She was watching him. She'd been watching him the whole time, tracking his movements the way prey animals tracked things that were larger than them. Not with fear, but with information gathering, the constant calibration of someone who had learned that knowing where people were could be the difference between what happened next being survivable or not. That awareness in a 6-year-old was not a thing Ridge could look at directly for very long. He pulled a stool close to hers and sat on it, bringing himself down to something closer to her eye level. Maisie, he said, the car outside. Did your mom's phone tell you anything about who might be following? Names, descriptions, vehicles? She said black trucks, Maisie said. She said he has people who drive black trucks with no plates on the front. That's what's out there. The girl absorbed this without visible reaction. She pulled the green backpack onto her lap and held it there, both arms around it, the way another child might hold a stuffed animal. What do we do? She asked. And Ridge Callahan, who had not had anyone ask him that question with genuine expectation of a useful answer in longer than he could accurately remember, felt the weight of it settle across his shoulders like something physical. We figure that out right now, he said. He stood up and looked at his brothers. This was the moment in any situation where the men around him sorted themselves, and it always happened the same way. Not through argument exactly, more through a kind of gravitational reveal, each man's fear or steadiness or selfishness becoming visible in how he held himself and where he looked. Ridge had watched it happen enough times that he could read it before anyone spoke. Briggs spoke first. He usually did. "We need to move her," Briggs said. He was 46, built wide through the shoulders, with a voice that had been roughened by 2 decades of outdoor work and too many cigarettes. He was not a coward, and Ridge knew it. He was a man with a specific relationship to risk assessment. Whatever's in that backpack, whatever that woman was into, we don't know enough. We move the kid somewhere, call the county social services, let the system is in the book, Ridge said. You don't know that. She told me that. She's 6. Her mother told her that. Her mother, Briggs said, and now there was something sharper in his voice, sent her 6-year-old daughter alone down a dark road in November. I'm not sure her mother's judgment is the thing we should be working from. The room went quiet in a way that felt careful. Ridge did not look away from Briggs. She ran out of options, Ridge said. That's different from bad judgment. Is it? You know it is. You've run out of options. Most of us in this room have. Briggs looked at the floor. His jaw moved, but he didn't say anything else, which was its own kind of answer. Hatch spoke from near the side door. He was 39 and quieter than Briggs, and when he talked, people listened because he didn't do it much. I want to know what's in the rest of the backpack, he said. The notebook's one thing. She said there were recordings. Ridge looked at Maisie. Can I look through it? She lifted the backpack off her lap and held it out to him. He unzipped the main compartment carefully. Inside, wrapped in a Ziploc bag, was a small voice recorder, the kind you'd find at any office supply store, old enough that its design was outdated, but new enough that it still had a full charge light. Beside it, also in Ziploc bags, were folded documents. He counted 9 separate folded sets, each held together with a rubber band, each labeled in Caroline Rowan's small, precise handwriting with dates and initials. At the bottom of the backpack, loose, was a child's drawing, crayon on white paper, slightly crumpled. A house. A woman with brown hair and a girl with dark hair. And to the left of them, for reasons that weren't immediately interpretable, a bird. Large and black, wings spread. Ridge looked at the drawing for a moment longer than he meant to. Then he set it aside carefully and picked up the recorder. Anyone object to hearing this? He asked the room. Nobody spoke. He pressed play. The voice that came out of the recorder was a woman's, steady and deliberate, the same quality of steadiness he'd noticed in Maisie, and he understood immediately that this was where the child had learned it. The voice spoke without preamble, as if the recording was a continuation of a thought already in progress. His name is Victor Rowan, and he has been moving money through the Harlan County Development Fund for 2 years and 4 months. The construction contracts, Rowan Build and the 2 subsidiary companies listed in the documents, they're the mechanism. The contracts are real, the work gets done, but the invoices are inflated by between 30 and 60% per project, and the difference goes into accounts I've listed on pages 12 through 18 of the notebook. The accounts belong to 7 men. 3 of them are county officials. 1 is a circuit court judge. 1 is a man named Gerald Fitch, who is the senior deputy in the county sheriff's department. A pause on the recording. The sound of paper moving. I'm not recording this because I'm brave. I'm recording this because I've run out of places to take it. I went to the sheriff's office in March. Fitch was the deputy who took my statement. I didn't know then. 3 days later, Victor told me exactly what I'd said in that office. Word for word. Another pause. I want whoever is listening to this to understand something. I am not asking you to be heroes. I am not asking you to fix everything. I am asking you to keep my daughter safe long enough for me to get the evidence to someone who can use it. That's all. That's the whole thing. A longer silence on the recording. Then, she trusts you already. She doesn't know you. But I've watched you for 6 months, and I know something about who you are, all of you, even if you don't know I was watching. You've made mistakes, so have I. But you don't hurt people who can't fight back. I've never seen that, not once. And in the position I'm in right now, that's the most important thing in the world. The recording ended. Ridge set the recorder down on the workbench. The garage was so quiet, he could hear the wind outside, and beneath the wind, very faintly, the idle of an engine. Not one of the Harleys. Something else. Something parked. Dex was sitting on the floor against the wall with his knees up and his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He'd sat down somewhere during the recording, and Ridge had noted it peripherally, and now he noted it again, more fully, because Dex was not a man who sat on floors. Dex was a man who stood with his weight forward, ready for whatever came next. The floor was not something Dex did. "You all right?" Ridge asked. Dex looked up. His face was arranged into something neutral, but his eyes were doing something else entirely. "Fine," he said. Ridge held his gaze for a moment. Then he let it go. "Okay," he said to the room. "The county's going to come for her. Might be tonight, might be morning. Social services order, custody claim, whatever form they put it in. If Fitch is involved, the paperwork will look legal, and it won't be." He looked around at the faces. "We can't call the sheriff. We can't call social services through normal channels until we know who's clean and who isn't. So we're just holding a kid hostage in a garage," Briggs said. "We're keeping a child safe while we figure out the right move." "That's a fine line, Ridge." "I know what line it is. The county comes, they see us with her, they'll use it. You know what the story looks like. Bunch of ex-cons holding a... I know what the story looks like." Ridge's voice had not changed volume, but something in it changed texture, and Briggs stopped talking. "I know exactly what the story looks like. That's been the story my whole life. It doesn't change what's right." Briggs sat down. Not agreement, but silence, which in this room was close enough. They moved Maisie to the back room. It was the room they used for storage and when someone had nowhere else to go, for sleeping. There was a cot along one wall, an old space heater that worked if you hit the side of it twice, a lamp with a shade that had been burned in one corner where it had sat too close to a bulb. Cutter found a pair of wool socks in his bag that were clean and put them on Maisie's feet without being asked. Tommy Lee found a second blanket and doubled it over the first. The girl sat on the cot and watched all of this with those serious eyes, and when Ridge told her she should sleep if she could, she looked at him with an expression that was not quite doubt, but was adjacent to it. "What if someone comes?" she asked. "Then we handle it." "Promise?" Ridge looked at her. He did not make promises lightly. He had made promises lightly once, a long time ago, and understood through specific and painful experience what it cost when you couldn't keep them. "Yes," he said. "I promise." She lay down with the backpack under her arm like a pillow. Her eyes stayed open for another few minutes, watching the door. Then they closed. Ridge stepped back into the main garage and pulled the backroom door almost shut, leaving it open 2 inches. Dex was standing at the workbench. He had a cup of coffee, so the garage had a machine that produced something approximately coffee-shaped, and he was holding it with both hands but not drinking from it. Ridge stopped beside him. 6 months, Ridge said quietly. "That's what she said on the recording. She's been watching us for 6 months." Dex kept his eyes on the cup. People watch things. She knew us. She knew enough to trust us with her daughter. People misjudge situations. Dex looked up. "Is there something you need to tell me?" Ridge asked. The space between those 2 words and whatever came next lasted long enough that Ridge counted it. 3 seconds. 4. Long enough that the answer was inside it whether Dex spoke or not. "No," Dex said. Ridge looked at him for another moment. Then he picked up his own coffee cup and walked to the window. The black truck was still there. At 2 in the morning, Briggs came to stand beside Ridge at the window. This was its own kind of communication, Briggs coming to him rather than staying planted across the room, and Ridge recognized it as something like apology without wanting to make Briggs say that out loud. "I'm not wrong about the optics," Briggs said. "No," Ridge agreed. "You're not. But I'm not right about what to do." "No." Briggs breathed out slowly through his nose. He was holding a cigarette he hadn't lit. He did that sometimes. carried cigarettes around unlit like they were something to hold rather than something to smoke. He'd been trying to quit for 3 years. Ridge had stopped commenting on it. She picked us for a reason, Briggs said. Yeah. That doesn't mean we're the right choice. Maybe not. But we're the choice that was made, Ridge paused. And she's asleep in the back room, and the truck is still out there, and right now all of that means we're the only choice there is. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Then, you think the mother's still safe? I don't know. If she's not, I know. Then the evidence is what matters, not just for Maisie, for... I know, Briggs. Ridge turned to look at him. I know what it means. I know all of it. Briggs finally lit the cigarette. He took one long drag and let the smoke go up toward the ceiling in a thin column. What do we do in the morning? We reach out to a journalist, Ridge said. Clean one. No local connections. He'd been thinking about it since the recording ended. The evidence gets out before any of this becomes a legal fight. Because if it becomes a legal fight first, they'll bury it. But if it's already in the public, if someone's already running the story, then coming after us becomes a different calculation. Briggs looked at him. You know a journalist? I know someone who knows one. That's a thin thread, Ridge. It's what we've got. Outside, the black truck turned on its parking lights. Just the parking lights. Yellow-orange in the dark, like the truck was opening its eyes. Ridge stared at it. Then his phone, face down on the workbench, began vibrating. He walked to it and picked it up. Unknown number, local area code, but a number he didn't recognize. He answered. Mr. Callahan. The voice was male, smooth, the voice of someone who had learned to use smoothness the way other men used volume. I think we should have a conversation about your current house guest. Ridge said nothing. I understand the impulse, the voice continued, pleasant as weather. She's a child. She's alone. You're the kind of men who, a brief pause, precise as a cut, have complicated histories. Doing the right thing feels important to you. I respect that. The voice paused again. I'm asking you to think carefully about what the right thing actually is here, because the situation you're currently in has several possible outcomes, and the ones that involve you keeping that child in your garage are significantly worse for you than the ones that don't. Ridge looked at the window, at the parking lights. Who is this? He said. Someone who is trying to make this easy, the voice said. I'll be in touch, Mr. Callahan. Don't wait too long. These situations have a way of becoming irreversible. The call ended. Ridge set the phone down. Hatch was looking at him from across the garage. Cutter. Tommy Lee. Briggs, with his half-smoked cigarette. They had all heard the tone of the call, even if not the words. Victor Rowan? Hatch asked. Don't know, Ridge said. Intermediary, maybe. He knows your name, Tommy Lee said. He knows my name. The implication of that spread through the room like the cold air had spread through it when Maisie opened the door. Invisible, but felt everywhere. He knows your name meant he had already looked, had already pulled what there was to pull, had already assembled the picture of Ridge Callahan, ex-convict leader of the Black Crows MC, last known address the garage on Sycamore Creek Road, criminal record going back to age 22, most recent release 4 years and 9 months ago. He had done that in the roughly 2 hours since Maisie walked through the door, which meant he had been ready to do it, which meant he had known it might need doing, which meant he had known about the garage before tonight, before Maisie walked 3 miles down a frozen road. Caroline Rowan had said they'd track the phone. Maybe. Or maybe they'd known the destination from the beginning. Ridge was still standing there, working through it, when the sound came from the road. Not the truck's engine. Something else. A second engine, somewhere behind the building, farther away, approaching. Not fast. Slow and deliberate, the way you approached something you were surrounding. Back door, Ridge said. Cutter. Cutter was already moving. Ridge crossed to the backroom door and pushed it open. Maisie was sitting up on the cot, fully awake, the backpack against her chest. She had not been asleep after all. Or she had been, and the engines had woken her. Either way, she was upright and her eyes were clear, and when she saw his face, she said nothing. She just stood up. You hear that? She asked. Yeah. Is that them? Ridge crouched in front of her. You've seen them before. The people who work for your father. You know what they look like? She nodded. If I show you a vehicle, can you tell me if it's one of theirs? I think so. He thought for a half-second. Then he stood, took her hand. She let him take it, which was something, some small transference of trust that he felt as a specific weight, and walked her carefully to the small window in the back room that faced the rear of the property. He kept them to the side of the frame, not silhouetted, the way you approached a window when you weren't sure what was on the other side. Through the glass, in the thin moonlight that had come out from behind clouds, he could see the rear lot, the old trailer, the stack of lumber covered in tarps, and at the back fence, just pulling to a stop with its engine cutting, a dark SUV. No plates visible. The engine sound died. Nobody got out. It was just there, like the truck in front was just there. They weren't moving in. Not yet. They were closing the exits. Maisie stood beside him and looked through the glass. In the moonlight, her face was very pale and very still. "That's one of his," she said quietly. Ridge looked down at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "My mom showed me pictures. She made me memorize them." A pause. "She said I might need to know." A 6-year-old who'd been shown surveillance photographs of the vehicles used by the men hunting her family, who had been drilled on them until she had them memorized, who had been prepared by her mother for a night exactly like this one. Ridge felt something cold and deep move through him. Not fear exactly, but the acknowledgement of a situation's full weight settling across his chest. He let Maisie's hand go gently and looked back out the window at the SUV sitting still against the fence. At the fence itself, which was chain link, 6 feet high, which was not a serious barrier for anyone who wanted to come over it. They were surrounded, not stormed, not confronted, surrounded, and the man with the smooth voice had said these situations had a way of becoming irreversible. Ridge walked back to the main garage. The men looked at him. "Back fence," he said. "Same setup as the road. They're on 2 sides." "3," said Cutter from near the front. He was holding his phone now despite Ridge's earlier instruction, and his face had gone the particular color of someone who had just seen something they didn't want to have seen. "I just pulled up the satellite view. There's a vehicle on the county road parallel to the east field. It's been there long enough to show up cached. 3 sides. Positioned. Quiet. Not police. If it were police, there would be lights by now. A procedure. Something that looked like law, even when it wasn't. This was private, organized, patient. Ridge looked at the document in his hand, one of the folded sets from the backpack, the one he'd opened while Maisie was being settled, the one with the name at the top he'd only just fully read. Gerald Fitch, Senior Deputy. And below his name, below the account numbers and the dates and the transaction amounts, one additional line that Caroline Rowan had underlined in red ink. "Fitch knows about the garage. He's been watching them for 16 months on VR's behalf, looking for leverage." Ridge read it again. They had not just known the destination, they had been watching this place for over a year, building a file, looking for the specific pressure point that would make 14 men with records do exactly what they were told, and now they had it. Now a 6-year-old girl with a backpack full of evidence was sitting on a cot in the back room. And if she left this building with the wrong people, the evidence left with her. And if the evidence left, it disappeared. The notebook, the recordings, the documents. All of it went into whatever room powerful men used to make inconvenient truths stop existing. And Caroline Rowan, wherever she was hiding right now, would have no protection left. Ridge set the document down. He looked at Dex. Dex was standing apart from the others, the way he had been standing apart for the last hour, his coffee untouched and cold on the workbench behind him, his eyes on the floor. Something was happening inside the man. Ridge could see the shape of it, even if he couldn't see the content. "Dex," he said. Quiet. Just his name. Dex looked up. "I need to know," Ridge said. "Whatever it is, I need to know right now." The garage waited. Outside, 3 vehicles sat quiet in the dark, patient as stones, and a man with a smooth voice was somewhere on the other end of a phone call that hadn't ended so much as paused. And the neon crow above the garage door flickered once in the wind, and Dex Morales opened his mouth to say something that Ridge could already tell, just from the way the man's jaw moved and the way his eyes dropped and came back up, was going to change everything about the next 12 hours. Dex said, "I know Victor Rowan. He said it the way you said something you'd been holding underwater for a long time and had finally stopped having the strength to keep down. Not loud, not dramatic, just the words, coming out flat and tired, and then the silence after them, which was worse than the words." Ridge did not move. The garage held its breath. Briggs stopped mid-motion, his hand halfway to the unlit cigarette in his pocket. Hatch turned slowly from the side door. Cutter looked at the floor. Tommy Lee looked at Dex. Everybody looked at Dex, and Dex looked at Ridge, because Ridge was the only person in the room whose reaction mattered right now, and they all understood that. "Talk," Ridge said. Dex pressed his back against the wall and slid down it until he was sitting on the floor again, and then he sat there with his knees up and his hands loose between them, and he talked. 18 months ago, his sister, Maya, 31 years old, living alone in an apartment in Lexington, had gotten herself into a situation with a loan that had started legitimate and become something else. The lender was a man named Carver, who worked for a network of people that Dex, at the time, had only understood as private money. Hard money. The kind of money that didn't go through banks and didn't need paperwork and collected differently than banks did when it wasn't paid back. Maya had borrowed $11,000. By the time Dex found out about it, through a phone call from Maya at 2 in the morning that he still heard sometimes when things were quiet, the debt had become $23,000, and Carver had come to her apartment twice, had stood in her doorway, had made the kind of statements that were not quite threats, because they didn't need to be quite threats to accomplish what threats accomplished. Dex had gone to Lexington. He had found Carver. He was not going to describe to this room what that conversation had looked like, Dex said, and Ridge did not ask him to. The room understood what Dex not describing something meant, but Carver had not been alone in this. Carver worked for someone. And the someone, when Dex had gone up the chain the way you went up chains when you needed to reach the person who actually made decisions, had turned out to be a man named Gerald Fitch, acting as an intermediary for a network of financial instruments that were, and this was the word Dex used, the specific word, sitting on that cold floor, Victor Rowan's. Dex had done one thing. One, a shipment of something. He didn't know what exactly. He hadn't asked. He had made the deliberate choice not to ask. Had needed to move through a checkpoint on Route 119 on a specific Thursday night, and Dex had made sure that the two bikers scheduled to ride that road that night rode a different road instead. That was all. He had altered a schedule. He hadn't touched anything, hadn't moved anything, hadn't looked at it or been near it. Maya's debt had disappeared the following Monday. Dex had not spoken to Carver or Fitch or anyone connected to Victor Rowan since that Thursday, had not been contacted, had not been asked for anything else. He had spent 18 months believing it was done. Dex stopped talking. The garage was so quiet that the space heater in the back room was audible through the closed door, its uneven mechanical breathing cycling on and off. Outside, the three vehicles had not moved. Ridge stood in the center of the room. He looked at Dex for a long time. Long enough that other men would have looked away, would have filled the silence with something, would have defended themselves or apologized or explained further. Dex did none of those things. He sat on the floor and held Ridge's gaze and took it, which was its own kind of courage, the exhausted courage of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment for a year and a half and had run out of the energy to keep dreading it. "The schedule you changed," Ridge said. "Who was on the road that night?" A pause. "Hatch and Tommy Lee." Both men heard their names, and Ridge saw them register it. Hatch's shoulders changing, Tommy Lee's chin coming up slightly, both of them recalculating backward through a night 18 months ago that they had ridden a different route on for no reason they had ever fully understood. "You told me there was road construction," Hatch said. His voice had something new in it. Not anger yet. Something preceding anger. "I know," Dex said. "You lied to my face." "Yes." "To protect your sister." "Yes." Hatch turned away. He put both hands on the workbench and stood there with his back to the room, his head down, and the muscles in his back and shoulders were doing something visible through his shirt. Ridge looked at the document in his hand. Caroline Rowan's handwriting. The line she had underlined in red. Fitch knows about the garage. He's been watching them for 16 months. 16 months. 1 month after Dex's Thursday. Which meant Fitch had not closed the account when Maya's debt was cleared. He had opened one. He had filed Dex Morales away the same way he filed everything. As a resource. As a pressure point. Something to be used when the right moment arrived. And the right moment had arrived. Tonight. With a 6-year-old girl in the back room and 3 vehicles positioned on 3 sides of this building. Ridge set the document down very carefully on the workbench. He set it down the way you set down something you needed both hands free to walk away from. "They've been holding this," Ridge said. Not to Dex specifically, to the room, to the shape of what he was seeing. 18 months, they've been sitting on what Dex did, watching this place, waiting for a situation where they needed leverage over us. He paused. And now they have one. The full architecture of it was becoming visible in his mind, the way the architecture of a trap became visible once you were already inside it. Not in pieces, but all at once, the whole thing, every angle showing itself simultaneously. Victor Rowan had known about the evidence, had known Caroline was collecting it, had been watching her the way Fitch had been watching this garage, cataloging her, waiting for her to run. And when she ran, when she made the choice to send Maisie here, they had followed. Because following her here accomplished 2 things at once. It located the evidence, and it activated the leverage. "Come for the girl," they'd say. Or we release what Dex did. Or we position you as the kidnappers instead of the protectors. Or all 3. Or something worse that Ridge hadn't thought of yet. The smooth voice on the phone. These situations have a way of becoming irreversible. He'd been telling Ridge exactly what the trap was. Politely, calmly. Because he could afford to be polite. Because he thought the trap was already closed. Briggs said, very quietly, "We've been set up." "Not exactly," Ridge said. "It's more specific than that. We were already set up, 18 months ago. Tonight's just when they're collecting. Well, the rain started at 2:40 in the morning. It came sideways off the fields, the kind of November rain that couldn't decide if it wanted to be sleet, that hit the metal roof of the garage in an irregular percussion that was almost but not quite rhythmic, that turned the gravel lot outside into a black mirror that reflected the parking lights of the truck at the road in doubled, distorted orange. Ridge stood at the window and watched the rain and tried to think past the anger. He was angry. He knew it. He could feel it in the specific tension behind his eyes and in his jaw and in the way his hands wanted to do something with themselves that was not standing still. He had a long history with anger and a long practice at not letting it make his decisions for him. And he called on that practice now the way you called on an old muscle, deliberately, consciously, feeling it resist before it engaged. Dex was still on the floor. Nobody had told him to get up. Nobody had told him to stay down. He had simply remained there, in the same position, in the posture of a man who understood that he had no right to demand comfort from this room right now. Maisie appeared in the back room doorway. She had the blanket around her shoulders and the backpack in her hands, and she stood in the doorway and looked at the room with those dark eyes, and Ridge looked back at her and thought, she's been listening. Of course she's been listening. She'd been awake when he thought she was asleep, and she'd been listening when she was supposed to be resting, because she was 6 years old and her entire life for the last 3 weeks had been about staying aware of what was happening around her. You didn't turn that off by closing a door. He crossed to her. "You heard," he said. "Not a question. Some of it." She looked past him at Dex. "Is he in trouble?" Ridge looked at her for a moment. "Why?" "Because he looks like my mom looked," she said, "when she was scared but trying not to be." Ridge turned and looked at Dex and saw, with the sudden clarity you got sometimes when a child's perspective landed in exactly the right place, that she was right. That was exactly what Dex looked like. He walked back to the center of the room and looked at his brothers. "I need everyone thinking," he said. "Not feeling, thinking. There's a difference, and tonight the difference matters." He looked at Hatch. Hatch had turned back around, his hands at his sides now, his face settled into something that was still working through damage but was functioning. "Hatch." "I'm here," Hatch said. "Good." He looked at Dex. "Dex, get up." Dex looked up at him. "I said get up." Dex got up. slowly, using the wall. He stood and he looked at Ridge, and his face was open in the way faces were open when all the defenses were down and there was nothing left to protect. "What you did," Ridge said, "was wrong. I know. You lied to this house for 18 months. I know. And we're going to deal with that, fully, every part of it, but not tonight." Ridge held his gaze. "Tonight I need you thinking with us. Can you do that?" Something moved through Dex's face, something complicated and not entirely comfortable to look at. He nodded. "Say it," Ridge said. "Yes," Dex said. "I can do that." Ridge turned to the room. Caroline Rowan spent 2 years building something. She risked everything to build it. She sent her daughter to us because she believed we were the ones who would protect it. He paused. "Victor Rowan thinks he's closed the trap. He thinks we're going to make the easy choice and hand the girl over and make this someone else's problem." Another pause. "He's wrong about us. But he doesn't know he's wrong yet, and that's the only advantage we have. We need to use it before dawn." It was Cutter who found the journalist. Not through any connection Ridge had mentioned. The thread through someone who knew someone had, on closer examination, been a thread that didn't go anywhere useful on a 2-hour timeline. But Cutter, who was 33 and had spent his pre-garage years in ways he didn't volunteer information about, had a specific kind of resourcefulness that Ridge had learned not to question too closely when it produced results. The journalist's name was Sandra Okafor. She wrote for a state-level investigative publication based in Frankfurt, had a record of published work on county-level corruption that Cutter pulled up on his phone and showed Ridge in thumbnail form. 41 years old, 2 awards, no local Harlan connections, which mattered. And she was, according to the email address Cutter had found in a public-facing author profile, reachable. "You want to email a journalist at 3 in the morning, Briggs said. "I want to contact her, yes," Ridge said. "She'll think it's insane." "It is insane. That doesn't make it wrong." He looked at Cutter. "Can you do it from something that doesn't trace back here?" Cutter's expression said that the question was mildly insulting. "Give me 10 minutes. He used a tablet from the back room and a VPN setup that Ridge didn't ask about and composed an email that Ridge read twice before approving. It was specific enough to be credible and vague enough not to hand over everything before they knew who they were handing it to. It included a partial photograph of 3 pages of the notebook, taken carefully so the specific accounts weren't visible, but the structure and handwriting and dates were. It included a single sentence about the evidence's scope, and it included a description of the current situation at the garage without addresses or names, just enough to convey urgency and enough to explain why this was coming at 3 in the morning instead of through official channels. The email went out at 3:12. Ridge did not expect a response before morning, but the act of sending it changed something in the room, something in the shape of what they were doing, moving it from pure defense into something that had a forward component, a direction, an offensive piece that didn't require them to win a physical confrontation with 3 vehicles full of men who had numbers and preparation on their side. He was standing at the workbench, rereading the documents, when the knock came. Not the side door, not the front bay doors, the back door. The one that faced the rear lot, the fence, the SUV he'd watched park there 2 hours ago. Everyone in the room went still. 3 knocks. Deliberate, even spacing. Not the knock of someone demanding entry, and not the knock of someone uncertain. The knock of someone who was announcing themselves without urgency, which was somehow more alarming than either alternative. Ridge picked up the wrench from the bench beside him. Not consciously. The way your hand found something solid when the rest of you was uncertain. He went to the back door. He did not open it immediately. He stood to the side of the frame and said, "Who's there?" A voice came through the door, female, low, rough around the edges in a way that sounded like physical exhaustion rather than effect. "My name is Caroline Rowan," the voice said, "and I need you to please let me in before the men at the fence see me." Ridge opened the door. She was not what he had assembled in his mind from the recording. He had heard her voice, controlled, precise, deliberate, and built something from it without realizing he was doing it. The woman who stepped through the back door of the garage was 34 years old with mud on her jeans to the knee and blood on her left hand where something had cut across 3 knuckles, and her hair in a wet tangle from the rain and eyes that were exactly the same color and shape as her daughter's, but with a decade more damage in them. She came through the door and he closed it immediately behind her, and she stood in the back hallway with water running off her, and she said, "Where is she?" Not a question, a direction. "She's safe," Ridge said. "Back room." Caroline looked at him for 1 full second. She was taking his measure the way someone took the measure of a person they had researched extensively and were now comparing against their research. Then she moved past him toward the back room door. He let her go. He heard the door open, heard Maisie say "Mama" in a voice that was nothing like the steady, rehearsed voice he'd heard in this building tonight. A voice that was purely a child's voice, a child who had been holding herself together through sheer preparation and had just reached the point where preparation could be put down. And he heard Caroline say something too low to make out, and then there was silence from the back room that was the silence of 2 people holding on to each other, and Ridge stood in the hallway and gave them 30 seconds before he went back to the main garage. The men looked at him. "Her mother's here," he said. The room processed this. Briggs sat down. Hatch leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling. "How'd she get past the vehicle at the fence?" Tommy Lee asked. "Don't know yet. And she knew about the back door." "She's been watching us for 6 months," Ridge said. "She knew about the back door." 3 minutes later, Caroline came into the main garage. She had Maisie beside her, one arm around the girl's shoulders, Maisie pressed against her mother's side in the specific boneless way children pressed against the people who were their whole world. Caroline looked at the room, at 14 men who looked back at her. Then she looked at Ridge. "I got here through the east field," she said. "There's a gap in the fence line about 40 feet from the vehicle. I came through the field." She paused. "I've had that route planned for 2 months." "You planned to come here," Ridge said. "Sending her was plan A," Caroline said. "Coming myself was plan B." "What changed?" Her jaw tightened slightly. "They found the car faster than I expected. I had to move." She looked around the room again, and something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly, because the situation was not one that supported relief, but something close to the experience of arriving at the only safe place available after a long time in unsafe ones. "They have people at the road and the fence. 3 vehicles, 3 sides." She nodded as if confirming something she'd expected. "They'll move at dawn. That's his pattern. Victor never does things at night if he can do them in the morning. Daylight is better optics. Whatever they do looks more like legal process and less like what it actually is." "How long have you known his pattern?" 2 years and 7 months, she said. "Since the first time I started paying attention." Ridge looked at her hand. The cut across the knuckles had dried dark. "Sit down," he said. "Let me get that cleaned." She shook her head. "There isn't time. There's 5 minutes. Sit." She sat. Not because she was told to. He understood already that was not how this woman operated, but because she had calculated that 5 minutes was available and that functioning better than she was currently functioning was worth 5 minutes. She sat on the stool that Maisie had occupied earlier and held her hand out with the pragmatic unself-consciousness of someone who had moved past the point of caring about appearances. Ridge cleaned the cut. She watched him do it without flinching and without looking away, which told him something. People who looked away from wounds were people who still had the luxury of being squeamish about pain. She had lost that luxury a while ago. Maisie sat on a second stool beside her mother and leaned against her arm and watched Ridge too. "The notebook," Caroline said. "You read it." "I did." "Then you know about Fitch." "I know about Fitch," he paused. "We know about something else too." He glanced at Dex, who was standing near the wall, and watched Caroline's eyes follow the glance and land on Dex and stay there. Something happened in that look. Something that passed between Caroline Rowan and Dex Morales that was not the first time these 2 people had occupied the same context, and Ridge saw it, and the seeing of it rearranged several things he had been thinking. "You know each other," Ridge said. Neither of them immediately denied it. "I told you I watched this place for 6 months, Caroline said. "That's not the same as knowing someone." A pause. "No," she said. It's not. She looked at Dex. Something moved between them, some negotiation of who said what, and then she looked back at Ridge. I know what he did. I knew before I sent Maisie here. I knew before I chose you. Ridge set down the antiseptic and the gauze and looked at her. You knew Dex gave Rowan's operation a clear road 18 months ago, he said. Yes. And you chose us anyway. Because of that? She said, not in spite of it. She held his gaze steadily. A man who made one wrong choice to protect someone he loves is not the same as a man without a conscience. He's actually the opposite. He's a man who proved he has something to protect. She paused. Those are the men I was looking for. Not perfect men. Men with something at stake. Ridge looked at Dex. Dex was staring at Caroline with an expression that had no clean name. The expression of someone who has been carrying a verdict for 18 months and has just been told by the only person whose verdict mattered that the verdict was different from the one they'd been living with. Hatch made a sound from the wall. It was not a word. It was the sound of someone recalibrating. Ridge turned back to the workbench. He needed to think. He needed all of this to hold still long enough for him to think. And that was when his phone vibrated. He picked it up. Unknown number again, same area code as before. He answered. The smooth voice said, Mr. Callahan, I see a light went on in the back of the building a few minutes ago. I hope everything is all right in there. They could see the windows. Of course they could. I'm going to give you until 5 a.m., the voice said. That's generous? I think you'll agree that's generous. At 5 a.m., if the child and the material she's carrying have not been brought out to my associates at the road, we'll have to escalate this in ways that will be significantly worse for your organization than simple compliance. A pause. You have something that belongs to someone else, Mr. Callahan. The simplest thing in the world is to return it. Ridge looked at Caroline, who was watching him. I want to speak to Victor Rowan directly, Ridge said. A brief silence, then, Mr. Rowan doesn't... Tell him, Ridge said, that his wife is here. The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. Not the strategic pause of someone managing a script, the unscripted silence of someone receiving information they did not have. The call ended. Ridge put the phone down. Caroline was looking at him with an expression that had gone very still. What are you doing? She said. Changing the calculation, Ridge said. He doesn't know you're here. That changes what he does next. It gives us something. Or it makes him move faster, she said. If he knows I'm here, the evidence is here. Everything is in one place. That's what he wants. I know. Then why? Because sitting still until 5 a.m. and hoping an email to a journalist produces something in 2 hours is not enough, Ridge said. We need him reactive instead of patient. Reactive men make mistakes. He looked at her. How well do you know him? His patterns, his reactions. You said you've been watching for 2 years. When he reacts without a plan, what does he do? Caroline looked at him for a long moment. The rain against the roof, the hum of the lights. He overcorrects, she said slowly. He always overcorrects. He throws resources at a problem. Too many, too fast. She paused. Which can create visibility, Ridge said. It creates visibility. Someone moves too many men too fast in a rural county at 4 a.m. That's not invisible. That's something a journalist paying attention can document. He paused. Or something a state police contact can notice. Somebody outside this county. Someone Fitch doesn't control. Caroline stared at him. You know state police? She said. I know one, he said. We don't like each other. But he doesn't like corruption more than he doesn't like me. And he's outside Fitch's jurisdiction and outside Rowan's network as far as I know. He paused. I was saving that card. I was going to need a very specific reason to use it. This isn't specific enough, Briggs said from across the room. It is now, Ridge said. With her here. With the full evidence package. With a witness. With documentation of armed men surrounding a building. He looked at Caroline. But I need you to authorize it. Whatever I make that call, whatever comes from it, it starts a chain. Legal chain. Official. It doesn't stop. Caroline looked at Maisie. Maisie was listening to all of this with those serious dark eyes and that still face, the child who had been prepared for this night and was seeing all of her preparation being used exactly as intended. And when her mother looked at her, she looked back and gave the smallest nod, barely perceptible, like they were continuing a conversation that had started weeks ago. Caroline looked at Ridge. "Make the call," she said. Ridge picked up his phone, and the front bay doors of the garage exploded inward. Not explosively, no fire, no shattering glass, but the padlock mechanism gave under something heavy and external. The chain ripped through the guide bolt, and both doors swung in hard and cold air, and rain blew in with them. And in the opening stood 4 men in civilian clothes and 1 man in a county sheriff's deputy uniform. And the man in the uniform was Gerald Fitch, and he was holding a document folded in thirds, and he was looking around the garage with the proprietary calm of a man who had been waiting a long time to be standing exactly where he was standing. His eyes found Caroline, then Maisie, then the backpack on the stool where Maisie had set it. He smiled. It was the smile of someone completing an arithmetic problem they'd been working on for 2 years. "Mrs. Rowan," he said, "I have a custody order signed by Judge." "Show me the signature," Ridge said. Fitch looked at him. "I'm sorry?" "The judge's signature," Ridge said. He was standing between Fitch and the room, between Fitch and the stool with the backpack, between Fitch and everything. "Show it to me. Right now." Fitch unfolded the document and held it up. Ridge looked at it, at the signature at the bottom, at the name printed below the signature. He had read that name an hour ago. In Caroline's notebook, on a page with account numbers beside it and 18 months of transaction records. Circuit Court Judge, named in the evidence, inside the network. The custody order was signed by a man who was himself documented as a criminal participant in the very situation this order was designed to resolve. Ridge looked at Fitch. "That signature," Ridge said, "is in the evidence package in that backpack, on a list of names associated with Victor Rowan's financial operation." He paused. "You just handed me the connection between the order and the corruption it's designed to protect." Fitch's smile didn't entirely leave his face, but something behind it did, some of the certainty. "That's an interesting claim," Fitch said. "Unfortunately, interesting claims don't—" "I made a call 20 minutes ago," Ridge said. It was not true. He had not yet made the call, but Fitch didn't know that, and the specific kind of bluff that was closest to the truth was always the most dangerous kind. "State police, out of this county. I described the situation, the vehicles, the names, the documents." He held Fitch's gaze. "Whatever you do in the next 5 minutes is going to be witnessed. However this goes, it's going on record in a place you don't control." Fitch looked at the 4 men beside him. The men looked at Fitch. The rain came through the open bay doors and puddled on the concrete floor, and the overhead work lights hummed and swung slightly in the draft, and the shadows in the garage moved in slow arcs across the faces of 14 men and 1 woman and 1 child. And in that light and that motion and that cold, Fitch looked at Ridge Callahan the way men looked at situations they had expected to control and had just discovered they could not. He was going to make a decision in the next 30 seconds, and Ridge did not know what that decision was going to be. And in the space of not knowing, Ridge felt something he had not felt since the last time everything had depended on the next 30 seconds. The absolute, clarifying, terrible focus of a man who has run out of room to maneuver and has only one thing left, which was to stand. Ridge stood his ground. That was all. That was everything. He stood between Gerald Fitch and the rest of the garage, and he did not move, and he did not speak, and he let the silence do the work that words couldn't do, which was to make the space between 2 men feel like a physical distance that would cost something to cross. Fitch took 1 step forward. Ridge didn't move. Fitch stopped. The 4 men behind Fitch were not deputies. Ridge had clocked that immediately. Wrong posture, wrong shoes, the particular way they held themselves that was not the trained stillness of law enforcement, but the ready stillness of men hired for specific physical purposes. Private. Rowan's. Wearing civilian clothes because this was not, whatever Fitch's folded document claimed, a legal operation. It was a retrieval. One of them, thick through the neck, close-cropped hair, a scar running white through his left eyebrow, was looking past Ridge at the backpack on the stool. Ridge shifted 2 inches to the right, blocking the sight line. The man's eyes came back to Ridge's face. "Mr. Callahan," Fitch said. He had recovered some of his smoothness, not all of it. "You're making this significantly harder than it needs to be." "You broke my door," Ridge said. "The order authorizes—" "You broke my door," Ridge said again, same flat tone, same volume. "In the middle of the night, with 4 men who aren't deputies, to take a 6-year-old girl." He paused. "Tell me what part of that is authorized." Fitch's jaw moved. "The child is in a dangerous environment. The order is signed by a man whose name is in that backpack on a list of Victor Rowan's associates," Ridge said. "You know that. I know that. Everybody in this room knows that. The only question is whether the people outside this county know that yet." Something shifted in the garage behind Ridge. Not movement, sound. The sound of boots on concrete, deliberate and unhurried from multiple directions at once. He didn't need to turn around to know what it was. His brothers were repositioning, moving into the space between Fitch's men and everything worth protecting in this building, doing it without being told because they had read the room and made the same calculation he had and arrived at the same place. Hatch's voice came from Ridge's left, low and even. "You want to count us before you take another step." Fitch looked past Ridge, counted. His eyes moved across the garage and came back, and something in his certainty shifted by a measurable degree. 14-5. And the 5 had not expected this. Had expected, Ridge understood now, a garage with a frightened child, and whatever resistance a few ex-convicts might put up before the legal document, and the uniform cowed them into compliance. They had not expected 14 men standing in the shape of a wall. They had not expected the particular quality of stillness that the Black Crows had right now, which was not aggression and not performance, but the specific, weight-bearing stillness of men who had individually and collectively reached the point past which they were not going to move. Fitch took out his phone. "Don't," Ridge said. "I'm calling for—" "You're calling for more men," Ridge said. "I know. Go ahead. But understand that every minute you spend calling, and every minute those men spend driving here, is a minute the documentation in that backpack is being transmitted to people outside your reach." He was still running the bluff, still holding it. The call to the state police contact had not been made. His phone was on the workbench 12 feet behind him. But Cutter was back there. Cutter, who had built a VPN at 3 in the morning on a tablet and found a journalist's email address in 10 minutes, was back there with his own phone and the resourcefulness that Ridge had long ago learned not to question. You can escalate this, but escalating this publicly is the one thing that destroys everything you're trying to protect. Fitch stared at him. The rain blew through the open bay doors, and the work light swung, and in the moving shadows, Fitch's face was doing something complicated. The face of a man running calculations, testing outcomes, looking for the angle that still worked in his favor, and not finding it as cleanly as he'd expected to find it. Then the scar-faced man behind Fitch moved. He moved fast, and he moved sideways, not toward Ridge, but around him, a lateral step to the left that was meant to split Ridge's attention. And Ridge was already turning when Hatch came off the wall, and Briggs came forward, and the man ran directly into 230 pounds of Briggs, stopping his movement with a hand in the center of his chest. "No," Briggs said. Just the word. The man looked at Briggs' hand, looked at Briggs' face, looked at the men behind Briggs. He took a step back, and then the phone rang. Not Ridge's phone. Fitch's phone. In Fitch's hand where he'd been about to dial out. It rang with a generic tone, and Fitch looked at the screen. And something happened to his face that Ridge had not seen happen to it yet. A sudden, involuntary thing, a flinch that was over in half a second but was visible, was real, was the face of a man whose handler had just called before he'd called them. Fitch answered. He listened. He said nothing for 4 seconds. Then he said, "Yes, sir," in a voice that had lost all of its smoothness and was just a voice now, just a man's voice receiving instructions. He ended the call. He looked at Ridge. "Victor Rowan," Ridge said, "wants to handle this himself." Fitch folded the custody document and put it back in his pocket. "Step outside, Mr. Callahan." "No." He wants to. He can come in, Ridge said. If Victor Rowan wants to talk, he comes through that door, in this room, in front of these people. Fitch looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Victor Rowan walked through the broken bay doors at 4:11 in the morning, and he walked alone. That was the first thing. He left whoever was with him outside in the rain, and he walked in alone. And it was either confidence or calculation, and Ridge had decided before the man's face was fully visible that it was calculation. The move of someone who understood that entering a room of 14 hostile men with 4 hired muscle would look like what it was, while entering alone looked like something else, looked like a man who wasn't afraid, which was its own kind of power. He was 53 years old and looked a decade less than that in the careful, maintained way of men who had enough money to make age feel optional. Medium height, dark suit, now rain-spotted across the shoulders. The face of a man who appeared on county development board photographs. Composed, pleasant, the particular pleasantness of someone who had practiced it until it was indistinguishable from genuine. He looked around the garage the way you looked around a room you owned or were in the process of acquiring. Then he saw Caroline. Something happened in his face, something fast and immediately controlled, like a flame touched by a hand. He looked at her for 2 seconds, just 2, and then he moved his eyes off her with the deliberate effort of someone who had trained himself to show nothing. He looked at Ridge. "Mr. Callahan," he said, the smooth voice. In person, it had a texture the phone hadn't conveyed, something underneath it, something that the pleasantness sat on top of like a floor over a basement. "Mr. Rowan," Ridge said, "I appreciate you seeing me. I didn't invite you. You broke my door." Rowan glanced at the bay doors. "I'll have that repaired." "Yeah," Ridge said. "You will." Rowan looked at him steadily. He was measuring Ridge the same way Caroline had measured him, comparing the reality to the research. But where Caroline's measuring had been about trust, Rowan's was about something else, about finding the specific load-bearing point in a structure that, once removed, caused the whole thing to collapse. "This doesn't need to be what it's become," Rowan said. His voice was addressed to Ridge, but his eyes moved across the room, touching each face briefly, cataloging. "A child is caught in the middle of an adult situation. That's unfortunate. I'm here to resolve that." "The resolution I'm seeing," Ridge said, "is a custody order signed by someone who's in your pocket and 4 men who aren't law enforcement breaking down my door at 4 in the morning. People make impulsive decisions when they're worried about their children." Rowan spread his hand slightly, a gesture of reasonableness, expansive and empty. "I'm worried about Maisie. She's been through a frightening experience. I want to bring her home." "She's home," Ridge said. A silence. Rowan looked at him. For the first time, the pleasantness on his face showed its seams, just at the edges, just for a moment. "She's in a mechanic's garage," he said, "with 14 men with criminal records. She walked 3 miles through a November night to get here," Ridge said, "barefoot, because her mother told her this was the safest place available." He held Rowan's gaze. "I want you to think about what it means that this was the safest place available." Rowan's jaw moved. "Caroline has been—" "Don't," said Caroline. Her voice came from behind Ridge, and it was not loud, but it landed in the room with the weight of something that had been held down for a very long time and was no longer being held down. Rowan's eyes went to her, and this time they stayed. "Don't explain what I've been," Caroline said. "Don't stand in this room and explain me to these men." She was on her feet. Maisie was beside her, Caroline's arm around the girl's shoulders. "They know what you are. They've read the notebook. They've heard the recordings. They know about Fitch and the judge and the accounts and the fund." Her voice was steady, with the particular steadiness that Ridge now recognized as the Rowan women's version of fury. Not hot, not loud, but utterly immovable. "You drove here at 4 in the morning because you found out I was in this building and you got scared. You came because you needed to see how bad it was." Rowan said nothing. "How bad is it?" Caroline said. Still nothing. "The journalist has 3 pages of the notebook," Ridge said, "and an account of tonight, as of 40 minutes ago." Rowan looked at Ridge, then back at Caroline, then at the backpack on the stool, and Ridge watched the calculation complete itself in real time behind the man's eyes. The specific moment when someone who has been managing a situation understands that the situation has moved past the point of management and into the territory of damage control, which was a different discipline requiring different choices. "Whatever you think you have," Rowan said, and his voice had changed, had dropped the pleasantness and gone to something harder underneath it, "is incomplete without context. The accounts, the fund, there are explanations. There are legal structures involved that—" "Gerald Fitch took my statement in March," Caroline said, "and 3 days later you repeated it to me word for word at the kitchen table." Her voice did not waver. "There is no structure. There is no context. You had him in your pocket, and he fed you everything I said, and you sat across from me and smiled." She paused. "I recorded that conversation too. It's on the recorder. It's in the backpack." Ridge had not known that. He had not gotten to the last recording. He watched that information land on Victor Rowan the way a specific kind of structural blow landed, not causing immediate collapse, but causing the internal sound that preceded it. The deep crack that meant everything above it was now in motion. "Victor," Fitch said from the doorway. His voice had something new in it now, something that was adjacent to panic and trying not to be. "We should—" "Shut up, Gerald," Rowan said. Fitch shut up. Rowan looked at the backpack. He looked at Ridge. "Name your price," he said. The garage went completely silent. Ridge looked at him. He let the silence sit for 5 full seconds. Let it fill the space. Let it become its own kind of answer. And then he said, "There isn't one." "Everything has—" "There isn't one," Ridge said again. "Not for this. Not for her." He meant Maisie, and Rowan understood he meant Maisie, and the understanding moved across Rowan's face like weather. Then Rowan moved, not toward Ridge, toward the stool, toward the backpack, a sudden sideways move that had no preamble, the move of a man who had run out of every other option and was operating on the single remaining instinct of someone who needed to get hold of the one physical object that changed everything. Ridge moved faster. He got to the stool first and had the backpack in his left hand and Rowan's right wrist in his right hand, and he held the wrist, and Rowan pulled against it, and Ridge held it without pulling back, just held it with the complete settled grip of a man with 51 years of physical consequence in his hands. And Rowan stopped pulling because the grip was not going to give, and he understood that. They stood 6 inches apart. Rowan was breathing hard. Ridge was not. "Let go of my arm," Rowan said. Ridge let go. Rowan stepped back. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Fitch and at his 4 men in the doorway and at the 14 men arranged through the garage. And he looked at his wife and his daughter, and he looked at Ridge Callahan holding a green canvas backpack, and he assembled all of it into whatever picture he needed to survive the next moment. "This isn't over," he said. "I know," Ridge said, "but this part is." And then Cutter's voice came from the back of the garage, clear and without drama. "Ridge, I've got someone." Ridge turned his head. Cutter was holding his phone out. His face had the careful, neutral expression of someone trying not to show how significant something was. "Sandra Okafor," Cutter said. "She's been up. She read the email at 2. She's had a colleague cross-referencing the account numbers for 3 hours. He paused. "She wants to talk to whoever's in charge." Ridge looked at Rowan. Rowan's face had gone a color that had nothing to do with the cold. "She says," Cutter continued, reading from the screen, "that she has enough from what we sent to run a preliminary piece by 6 a.m. She wants the rest for the full story. She says, and she says, to quote this exactly, she says, 'Tell them not to give anything to anyone until they've talked to me.'" He looked up. "She also says she's been working this county for 8 months, independently. Says our documents fill gaps she couldn't fill." 8 months. Sandra Okafor had been working Harlan County for 8 months. She had been working toward the same evidence that Caroline had been building for 2 years and 4 months, coming from a different direction, and they had been walking toward each other across the same landscape without knowing it. And tonight, at 4 a.m, in a mechanic's garage with a broken bay door and rain blowing in across the concrete, they had arrived at the same place. Ridge looked at Fitch. He looked at the 4 men in civilian clothes. He looked at Victor Rowan. He said, "It's done." Rowan looked at him. Something was moving behind his eyes. The specific, terrible motion of a man watching the structure he has spent years building develop the kind of fracture that does not repair. Not the crack of a single blow, but the deep, spreading, unstoppable fracture of something that had been weakened from too many sides for too long, and had finally encountered the force it could not absorb. "You have no idea," Rowan said quietly, "what you've started." "I have some idea," Ridge said. "I'm all right with it." Rowan turned. He walked toward the bay doors. His men stepped aside for him, and Fitch followed, and the four men followed Fitch, and they went out through the broken doors into the rain and the dark, and Ridge stood in the opening and watched them go. Watched them move across the gravel lot toward the black truck at the road, watched the parking lights come on, watched the truck pull out slowly. The other vehicles followed, one by one. The Eastfield SUV, the parallel road vehicle. All of them pulling away in the rain, the red taillights shrinking and then gone. Ridge stood in the open doorway. The cold came in around him. The rain was lighter now, the sleet component gone, just rain, running off the eave above the doors in a thin, continuous curtain. The neon crow above the entrance flickered once in a gust and steadied. Behind him, the garage breathed. He heard Maisie say something to her mother, too low to make out. He heard Caroline respond. He heard Dex's voice, and Hatch's, and the general low-register sound of 14 men exhaling something they'd been holding for hours. He turned around. The room looked back at him. Caroline was sitting on the stool now, Maisie in her lap, the girl's face pressed against her mother's neck. Cutter had the phone to his ear, talking quietly to Sandra Okafor. Briggs had finally lit a cigarette and was smoking it with the exhausted relief of a man who had earned it. Dex was leaning against the wall with his eyes closed and his head back. Hatch walked to Ridge and stood beside him and looked out at the empty road. "They'll regroup," Hatch said. "Yes." "Rowan doesn't just stop." "No." "So what comes next?" Ridge looked at the phone in his hand, at Cutter talking to the journalist, at the backpack on the workbench where he'd set it down, the green canvas ordinary and battered and containing 2 years of a woman's courage in documented form. "Now it goes public," Ridge said. "Everything, all of it, before he can regroup." "And if it's not enough?" Ridge looked at Hatch. At the question that wasn't really a question, that was the acknowledgement of the thing that came after the immediate crisis, the longer, harder terrain that didn't resolve in one night in a garage. Courts, processes, attorneys and hearings, and the grinding machinery of systems that had already demonstrated their capacity for corruption, but that were also, despite that, the only legitimate mechanism available. "Then we fight the next thing," Ridge said. "Same as this." Hatch nodded slowly. From the back of the room, Maisie's voice, small, clear, carrying in the quiet the way children's voices carried. "Is it over?" she asked. Ridge looked at her across the room. She was looking back at him from her mother's lap, her face tired now, in a way it hadn't been before. The specific exhaustion of a child who had been holding herself together through sheer will and was now in the presence of her mother, and the will was no longer required, and the body was remembering that it was 6 years old and had been barefoot on a frozen road and had not slept. "The worst part," Ridge said. "Yeah, the worst part's over." She looked at him with those serious dark eyes for one more moment. Then she put her face back against her mother's neck. And outside, just barely audible through the rain and the distance, somewhere on the road heading away from Sycamore Creek toward the county line, the sound of Victor Rowan's vehicles faded into the dark. And the Black Crow's garage stood in the rain with its broken door and its flickering crow and its 14 men and its woman and its child. And the silence that followed was not empty, but full of everything that had just happened and everything that was coming and everything that, for the first time in a long time, felt the word that didn't come was possible. Ridge stood in the broken doorway of his garage at 4:17 in the morning, the rain coming down soft now, almost gentle, the kind of rain that arrived after the hard weather had passed and seemed almost apologetic about the damage its predecessor had done. He stood there long enough to feel the cold settle into his shoulders and his neck, and the specific deep ache in his right knee that had been with him since Eddyville and would be with him until he died. Then he turned around and went back inside. The first thing he did was find 2 sawhorses and a sheet of plywood and prop it across the broken bay doors. It wasn't a door, it didn't lock. But it blocked the wind and the rain and the open space, and sometimes blocking an open space was enough for the moment, even when it wasn't a solution. Hatch helped him without being asked, holding the plywood while Ridge secured it, neither of them speaking. The work was simple and physical and brief, and when it was done they both stood back and looked at it, and Hatch said, "Holds until morning," and Ridge said, "Holds until morning." And that was the whole conversation. Caroline was at the workbench. She had the documents from the backpack spread in front of her in careful order, the notebook, the folded sets, the recorder, and she was going through them with Cutter, who had Sandra Okafor on the phone, now an actual voice conversation rather than email, the tablet propped against a coffee can while Cutter held his phone to his ear and described documents, and Caroline pointed to specific pages. The journalist's voice came through the speaker in short, precise bursts, asking specific questions. The voice of someone who had been awake for a long time and was running on the specific fuel of a person who had found the story they'd been building toward for 8 months. Ridge watched this for a moment. Then he went to check on Maisie. She was in the back room on the cot, asleep now, finally and completely, curled on her side with the green wool blanket pulled to her chin and her face slack in the particular total unconsciousness of a child's deep sleep. The cartoon fox on the backpack was visible above the edge of the cot where someone had tucked it within reach. The space heater ticked and breathed its uneven rhythm. The burned lampshade threw a warm, uneven light across the cot and the girl and the walls. Ridge stood in the doorway and looked at her. He had a memory. Not one he visited often, not one he had any use for in his daily life. Of being 8 years old and sleeping in the back of a truck on a drive through West Virginia, his father's jacket over him because it was the only thing available, the smell of motor oil and tobacco, the smell of safety at that age, his whole world compressed to the sound of the engine and the warmth of the jacket, and the understanding that wherever they were going, he was being taken there by someone larger than him, whose job was to handle the things he couldn't handle yet. He had not thought about that memory in 15 years. He pulled the backroom door almost closed and went back to the garage. Dex was alone near the parts shelf. He was sitting on an upturned crate with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands and his eyes on the middle distance, looking at something that wasn't in the room. Ridge got himself a cup from the machine, still coffee-shaped, barely, and walked over and sat on the workbench beside him. Not close, just adjacent. They sat for a while. "She knew," Dex said, not opening the conversation so much as continuing something that had been in progress inside him for hours. "Caroline, she knew what I did, and she still—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I keep trying to make that make sense." "It makes sense," Ridge said. "She put her daughter's life in the hands of a man who did work for the people hunting her. She put her daughter's life in the hands of a man who did one thing wrong to protect someone he loved and has been paying for it every day since." Ridge looked at him. "She knew the difference. You should too." Dex looked at his coffee. "Hatch isn't going to forgive me easy." "No," Ridge said. "He's not." "He has a right to be." "He has every right," Ridge said. "And you're going to sit with that, for as long as it takes." He paused. "But you're going to sit with it here, in this house. You understand me?" Dex looked up at him. Ridge held his gaze. "You're not going anywhere. You're not leaving because it's uncomfortable, and you're not withdrawing because it's easier. You're going to stand in front of the people you lied to and let them be angry, and you're going to do your time with that the same way you've done your time with everything else. Present." Dex's throat moved. He looked back down at the coffee. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." They sat for another few minutes in silence that was not comfortable and not uncomfortable but simply real. The silence of two men who had known each other long enough that silence between them had content. Then Briggs appeared with the coffee pot and refilled both their cups without asking, and that was, for now, what forgiveness looked like from Briggs. Not a word, not a gesture, just hot coffee at 4:30 in the morning, which was more than nothing, and both men understood it. Ochad. Sandra Okafor's piece ran at 6:14 a.m. Not the full piece. That would take another 3 days of verification and editing, and the specific careful process of an investigative journalist who understood that the strength of what she was doing depended on its being bulletproof before it went public. But the preliminary piece. Enough. The accounts. The fund. Gerald Fitch's name, the circuit court judge's name, the structure of what had been happening in Harlan County for 26 months, drawn in outline with enough specificity that it was not allegation but documentation, not accusation but evidence. Cutter found it on the publication's website at 6:17 and read the headline aloud to the garage. Harlan County Development Fund. New documents allege coordinated financial fraud involving law enforcement and judiciary officials. The garage was quiet for a moment. Then Tommy Lee, who had said almost nothing for the entire night, said, "Huh." Which was the review it deserved, Ridge thought. The state police contact. A detective named Arlen Moss, whom Ridge had met through circumstances he did not enjoy remembering, and who had, for complex reasons involving a case 3 years ago, a specific obligation to Ridge that neither of them had ever named directly, arrived at the garage at 7:40 a.m. with 2 colleagues and a warrant that had not come through Harlan County's system. Moss was 58 and looked it without apology and walked through the propped plywood at the bay doors with the air of a man who had seen everything and had opinions about most of it and kept them to himself professionally. He looked at the garage. He looked at the broken door hardware on the floor. He looked at Ridge. "You look terrible," Moss said. "Long night," Ridge said. "Your night is about to get longer." He wasn't unsympathetic. He was just accurate. "I need the documents. I need a statement from Mrs. Rowan. I need statements from anyone who was present when Fitch came through that door." He looked at the room. "That's going to take a while." "We've got coffee," Ridge said. "I've seen your coffee," Moss said. "I'll manage." It took 4 hours. 4 hours of careful, methodical documentation, Moss and his 2 colleagues moving through the garage with the unhurried precision of people who understood that the speed at which they worked now would determine the strength of what they built later. Caroline sat with one of them for 90 minutes and gave her statement in the same precise, controlled way she did everything. And Ridge watched her from across the room and understood something he hadn't fully understood before. That the quality he'd identified as steadiness in her was not the absence of fear, but the presence of practice. She had been afraid for 2 years and 4 months, and had continued anyway, and that repetition had built something in her that looked like calm and was actually something harder and more durable than calm. Maisie woke up at 8:30 and came out of the back room and looked at the men with badges in the garage and looked at Ridge. He crouched down to her level. "These are the good ones," he said. She considered this with the same seriousness she considered everything. "How do you know?" "They came through Moss," he said. "Moss and I don't like each other, but he's clean." She weighed this. "Like how my mom chose you because you were the ones who didn't hurt people who couldn't fight back?" Ridge looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly like that." She nodded and looked at the agents and then went to find her mother, and Ridge stood up and watched her cross the garage floor in Cutter's wool socks, still too big, bunching at her ankles, and he had to look at the ceiling for a moment at nothing in particular. Victor Rowan was detained at his home outside of town at 9:52 a.m. Ridge heard about it from Moss, who delivered the information with the flat economy of a man reporting a fact rather than celebrating an outcome. Gerald Fitch had been brought in at the county line at 8 a.m. when Moss's colleagues had intercepted him, attempting to leave in a personal vehicle with a bag that turned out to contain documentation of its own, the kind of documentation a man packed when he was planning not to come back. The circuit court judge had called an attorney at 7 a.m., which was, in its own way, a kind of confession. The 4 civilian men who had come through the bay doors with Fitch were identified by 4 in the afternoon as contracted security employees of a private firm, 2 with prior records that made their involvement in the unauthorized entry a straightforward additional charge. They did not present themselves as complicated problems. They were the expendable tier of an operation that had lost its architect. None of this resolved quickly. That was the thing Ridge had to keep explaining to himself throughout the long morning and the longer afternoon, that what had happened in the garage in the dark was the beginning of a process, not the end of one, and that the process would involve attorneys and hearings and delays and appeals and the particular grinding slowness of institutional accountability, which moved at a pace designed to be thorough and felt, from inside it, designed to be punishing. But it was moving. And the piece Sandra Okafor ran that afternoon, 3,000 words, fully verified with document links, was the kind of peace that moved things that institutions preferred to leave still. At 2 in the afternoon, the garage was finally quiet. Moss and his colleagues had gone. Most of the brothers had dispersed to sleep, to their own spaces, to the particular private recalibration that followed something like the previous night. Hatch had left on his bike at noon without saying where he was going, which was his right, and Ridge had watched him go and trusted him to come back, which was also his right. Tommy Lee was asleep on the cot in the back room. Briggs was at the workbench doing something to a carburetor that probably didn't need doing but gave his hand something to do, which was the same thing Dex had been doing the night before. And Ridge thought about that parallel, and thought about how many ways there were to hold yourself together that looked like other things from the outside. Dex had gone to call his sister. Ridge had been in the garage when he made the call, had not tried to give him privacy because privacy was not the thing Dex needed right now. He needed to be in a room with people he'd lied to, and have them know he was making the call he should have made 18 months ago. The conversation had been short. Maya had cried. Dex had not, quite, but his voice had done something during it that was close. When he ended the call, he sat with the phone in his hands for a while, and Ridge did not say anything, and that was enough. Caroline came to find Ridge at 2:30. He was at his own workbench, the panhead in front of him, his hands on the tank in the position of someone who was thinking about working rather than actually working. She pulled a stool up and sat on it, and they were quiet for a moment, the comfortable quiet of two people who had been through something together and didn't need to name it. "She wants to stay," Caroline said. Ridge looked at her. "Maisie." Caroline looked at her hands. The cut across the knuckles had been properly bandaged now, clean white gauze. "She told me this morning. She said she wants to stay here." A pause. She said, and I'm quoting her exactly, she said, "The men here are loud, but they don't scare me, and that's different from other places." Ridge looked at the panhead. "I don't know what that means for the long term," Caroline said. "I don't know what the court process looks like, what custody looks like, what our lives look like once the legal situation resolves." She paused. "But she said it. I thought you should know she said it." Ridge was quiet for a moment. "Where are you going to go?" he asked. "The state's victim assistance program has transitional housing. Moss gave me a contact." She looked around the garage, at Briggs at the bench, at the motorcycles under their covers, at the flickering crow visible through the patched bay doors. "It won't be permanent, but it's somewhere." "You can stay here," Ridge said, "both of you, for as long as you need." She looked at him. "There's a room," he said. "It's not much, but it's warm and the door locks, and nobody here is going to let anything come through it." Caroline looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Callahan?" "Ridge." "Ridge." She paused. "Why?" He thought about the question. He thought about how to answer it honestly without making it into something larger than the simple, specific thing it was. "She walked 3 miles," he said, "barefoot in November, because her mother told her she'd be safe here." He paused. "I don't want that to have been wrong." Caroline looked at him. Something moved through her face. Not the controlled steadiness he'd come to recognize as her default, but something underneath it, something that the steadiness usually covered. And in the moment before she put the steadiness back, he saw what was under it: exhaustion and relief and grief, and the specific gratitude of someone who had been calculating every next step alone for so long that the offer of another person's help felt almost like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." She said it simply, without elaboration, and he accepted it the same way, and they sat for another few minutes at the workbench in the January light coming through their garage windows, which was thin and gray but present, winter light doing what winter light did, not warming anything, but showing it clearly. The hearing was in March. It was a family court proceeding in a courtroom in a county that was not Harlan County, moved on a change of venue motion that Caroline's attorney, pro bono, from a firm in Frankfurt that had been following Sandra Okafor's series, had filed in January. The judge was a woman who had no connection to Victor Rowan's network and no connection to Harlan County, and who had read the case file with the thoroughness of someone who intended to understand what she was adjudicating. Victor Rowan was present in the courtroom, seated across the aisle with his attorney. He had been released on bail pending trial on charges that were multiple and serious, and that his legal team was contesting with the full resources available to a man of his means, which were considerable. He looked at Ridge when Ridge entered the courtroom, and Ridge looked back, and neither of them looked away immediately. And then the hearing began, and neither of them looked at each other again. Ridge was not there as a party. He was there as a character witness. He sat in the witness box and answered the questions Caroline's attorney asked him, and he told the truth, which was the only thing he had ever found worth doing in courtrooms, in his experience, despite evidence that it wasn't always sufficient. He described the night of November 17th in specific detail. He described Maisie walking through the door. He described Caroline coming through the back. He described what he had observed and what decisions he had made and why he had made them, without editorializing and without embellishment. And when the opposing attorney asked him about his prior convictions, he confirmed each one by name and date and sentence length. And when they asked him if he thought someone with his record was a suitable environment for a child, he said that he thought the record of what had happened in his garage on November 17th was more relevant to that question than the record of what had happened in his life before it. And the judge looked at him when he said it, and he looked back. He was in the witness box for 40 minutes. When he stepped down, he went back to his seat in the gallery, and Briggs was to his left, and Dex to his right, and Tommy Lee and Cutter, and Hatch beyond them, the whole row of them in the clean shirts they'd worn without being asked, the kind of clean shirts you wore when you understood that what you were doing in a room mattered, that the room required something from you and you were going to give it. Hatch had come back to the garage 3 days after the night of November 17th. He had come back in the afternoon and put his bike away and gone to find Dex and said something to Dex privately that nobody else heard, and afterward Dex had looked like a man who'd set down something heavy and was learning to walk without the weight of it, which was its own difficult adjustment, but better than the alternative. Ridge had asked Hatch nothing about it. Hatch had offered nothing. The matter was between them, and the resolution of it was between them. That was how these things worked. The judge granted Caroline full custody, with a finding that Victor Rowan's documented conduct constituted grounds for termination of his custodial rights, pending the outcome of his criminal proceedings. It was not the end of the legal road. His attorneys would appeal. There would be more hearings, more process, more of the grinding machinery. But for today, for this room, on this March morning, it was enough. It was the kind of enough that you felt in your sternum. Maisie was in the gallery with Tommy Lee's wife, the one brother with a family, who had offered to bring the girl and had done it without ceremony, the way the practical kindnesses in this circle of people operated, quietly and without requiring acknowledgement. When the judge read her decision, Maisie did not fully understand the language, but she understood the tone, and she looked at Ridge across the row of men, and Ridge gave her one nod, deliberate and complete. She put her face in her hands. Not because she was sad. Ridge understood that immediately. She put her face in her hands the way you did when something you'd been tensed against for a very long time finally stopped being something you needed to be tensed against, and your body didn't know what to do with the release of that, and the only thing available was to put your face in your hands and let it happen privately. He looked away and gave her that. 6 months after the night of November 17th, the garage on Sycamore Creek Road had a new sign above the bay doors, not replacing the neon crow. The neon crow was still there, still flickering slightly in wind, still the first thing you saw from the road. But beside it, smaller, hand-lettered on a piece of exterior-grade wood that Cutter had made and Briggs had painted and Tommy Lee had mounted, "Safe stop. No questions. Knock twice." It had been Maisie's idea. She had presented it to Ridge one Saturday morning in May, sitting across from him at the workbench with a piece of paper where she'd drawn the design in crayon, the same crayon she'd used to draw the house and the woman and the girl and the blackbird with spread wings. She'd explained it with the particular directness of a child who had thought something through completely before bringing it to the person who needed to decide. "People who need somewhere to go," she said. "They should know they can come here." Ridge had looked at the drawing for a moment. "Like you did," he said. "Like I did," she agreed. "But so they don't have to walk as far." The sign had gone up the following weekend. 3 people had knocked in the 6 months since. A woman with 2 kids from a county over whose situation had required a phone call and a ride, and 3 nights on the backroom cot before something more permanent was arranged through a network that Caroline, working with a nonprofit organization in Frankfurt, was in the process of building. A 17-year-old boy who'd aged out of a foster placement and had nowhere concrete to be. And one night in September, an older man, 60, maybe 65, hard to say, who had knocked twice, and when the door opened had simply stood there for a moment without speaking, and Tommy Lee had opened the door wider and said, "Coffee's hot," and that had been enough. Ridge did not know if what they were building had a name or needed one. He suspected it didn't need one. It was what it was. A garage with a broken history and a repaired door and a sign that said what it meant. He was at the Panhead on a Tuesday evening in late November, almost exactly a year from the night everything had changed, when Maisie came through the side door after school with her backpack. A new one, blue, with no fox, with 2 working zippers, and climbed up on the workbench stool and watched him work. This was a routine now. She came here after school when Caroline was working, which was most days, and she did her homework on the workbench and ate whatever was available in the garage kitchen, and watched whoever was working on whatever was being worked on. She had opinions about engines. This had developed gradually over the preceding months and was now fully established. She had specific opinions about the Panhead in particular, which she had communicated to Ridge on multiple occasions with a directness that he had come to understand was entirely her mother's daughter. "You're still not doing the primary chain right," she said. Ridge looked at her. "You keep adjusting it and then not adjusting it enough and then having to do it again," she said. "If you did it right the first time, you wouldn't have to keep coming back to it." Ridge looked at the primary chain. He looked at Maisie. "You're 7 years old," he said. "I know," she said, "and I've watched you do it wrong 4 times. He looked back at the chain. She was not incorrect. "You want to show me?" he said. She looked at him very seriously. Then she climbed off the stool and came around to his side of the workbench, and he moved over and she looked at the chain with the assessing eyes of someone who had been absorbing mechanical information for 6 months, with the particular absorption capacity of a 7-year-old who had decided she was interested in something. She pointed to the adjustment point. "There," she said, "more than you think you need." Ridge adjusted it. He tested it. He looked at Maisie. She looked back at him with an expression that was not smugness. She was too serious for smugness, but was the quiet satisfaction of being right about something you had reasoned out carefully. "Huh," Ridge said. "Yeah," she said. She climbed back on the stool, got out her homework. The garage settled around them. The hum of the fluorescents, the smell of oil and metal and coffee, the early dark of November pressing against the windows, the neon crow outside throwing its orange light across the gravel lot in the long, familiar way it always had. Somewhere down the road, a Harley engine turned over and caught, and the sound of it rolled across the cold fields and through the garage walls, and Ridge felt it in his chest the way he always felt it. Not nostalgia, not sentiment, just the deep physical recognition of something that was part of him, whether he had chosen it to be or not. The same way certain things became part of a person through accumulation rather than decision. He thought about Dex, who was in the back room on the phone with his sister again. Maya had started calling twice a week, which was its own kind of mending, and about Hatch, who was at the corner bench working on a customer bike, with the focused quiet that was his natural state when things were as all right as they were going to be, and about Briggs, who had finally actually quit smoking 3 weeks ago and was approximately 40% more irritable as a result, but was managing it. He thought about Caroline, who was in an office in Frankfurt 2 days a week, building something that had to do with getting evidence to people who could use it, because the 2 years she'd spent learning how to do that hadn't stopped being useful just because her own situation had resolved. He thought about Tommy Lee, who had brought the kid who knocked in September to a job interview last week, and reported back that it had gone well, in the matter-of-fact tone of a man who had not considered this an unusual thing to do. He picked up a wrench. Across the workbench, Maisie turned a page in her homework book. Outside, the neon crow flickered once in a gust off the fields and held, and the Harley engine on the road faded into the distance, and the night came down fully over Sycamore Creek Road the way it always did, cold and dark and indifferent. And inside the garage the lights were on and the coffee was hot, and the door had a sign beside it that said what it meant, and that, Ridge thought, was the whole of it. Not a perfect thing, not a clean thing, just a thing that was still standing. And Maisie Rowan, who had walked 3 miles barefoot through a November night carrying a secret powerful enough to destroy an empire, sat on a workbench stool in a mechanic's garage doing her second-grade homework, and she was exactly where her mother had said she would be. Safe. Home.